Hey everyone, my name is Leah and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about all of the books that I read in the month of January. I want to start off with some stats, so I'm going to be consulting my iPad for this because I have all the stats written down there. In total, I read 23 books in the month of January. I gave 2 books 3 stars, 14 books 4 stars, 5 books 4.5 stars, and 2 books 5 stars. So all in all, that's a really good reading month, especially since I didn't have any 1 or 2 star reads. I didn't have anything below a 3 star. The majority of my readings were 4 or 4.5. However, I do think I would like to see more 5-star ratings in general because there were only 2 books that absolutely blew me away. But all in all, that's pretty good in terms of star ratings. I read 3 graphic novels, 4 manga, 1 picture book, 2 novellas, and then the rest were all full-length novels. Now the rest of the stats won't be including the graphic novels or manga or the picture book. So in terms of the novels and novellas that I read, 4 were adult and 11 were YA. That's a pretty good split. I think I would like to try to read a little bit more adult in terms of going forward in the year. I don't know if that will necessarily happen, but we'll see. Then the genre split of the novels and novellas, I only read in 2 different genres. That's something I really want to try to branch out of more this year, so I want to try to, I think, do better about that in future months. I read 10 fantasy, 4 were adult, and 6 were YA, which is a pretty even split, and then I read 5 contemporaries that were all YA. One of the contemporaries also had some sci-fi elements, but when something has elements of a couple different genres, I'm going to kind of classify it as one genre first and foremost, and I think I would classify this mostly as a contemporary, so I'm going to call it that. So yeah, I pretty much, other than the graphic novels and manga and stuff that I read, I pretty much only read fantasy and contemporary, and fantasy is my favorite genre, so that's pretty expected, but like I said, I want to branch out and try other genres more, so I want to work on that more for future months. Also, I read 10 books from my physical TBR, which is pretty good. That's a pretty good chunk. I want to try to continue that kind of proportion going forward and try to get a lot more books on my physical TBR read. And there were 2 books this month that were rereads. Alright, now getting into the books. First up was Space Battle Lunchtime, Volume 2 by Natalie Reese. This was a really good follow-up to Volume 1. I don't want to say that much about it because it is a sequel and I read Volume 1 last year for the first time. This just had some fun space and cooking adventures. It was really enjoyable. There were also confirmed sapphics. In Volume 1, there were a lot of like sapphic vibes and I was like, are they? I'm pretty sure, but it was definitely confirmed in this volume, so if you are looking for some graphic novels with sapphics and aliens and space cooking adventures, pick this one up. It's so fun. The sapphic romance is between the main character and an alien character that's in the graphic novel. Like I said, I don't want to say too much more about this because it is a sequel and I don't want to spoil anything about Volume 1, but I definitely recommend this graphic novel. Next up was Royal Assassin by Robin Hobb. This is book 2 in the Farseer trilogy. I absolutely loved book 1. I read it in 2019 and it was one of my favorite books of the year, and then last year I reread it via audio and I've been meaning to pick up this book ever since I finished book 1 for the first time and just never did, and I finally picked it up and I am so glad I did. I loved seeing the main character Fitz and seeing his journey and just following him as he continues to grow. I will say there was a love interest that I didn't really care about, and anytime that was part of the story, I was just kind of reading it like, okay, can we move to something else now? So unfortunately I didn't really care about those parts of the book, but I will say the other sections of the book, and especially the last half of this book, absolutely made up for that. So if you are reading the series and you find yourself kind of being frustrated or not caring about certain parts, keep going because oh my god, was this worth it. Especially the last like 200 pages, I was on the edge of my seat. I was losing my mind. I was feeling so many different emotions. Oh my gosh. The last like 100 pages were just The ending just shook me to my core. Like, I was absolutely shaken. It was so good. And I was like, Robin Hobb, where are you going to go from here? Like, what are you doing? Where is this story going? It was so good. This book just made me feel like every spectrum of human emotion as I was reading. It was just so good. I can't say anything else about it because it's the second book in a series and I can't spoil book one and I can't spoil this book, but oh my god, but just please read this book. If anyone has read this book, please come talk to me about it because it's so good. It's just, I just love this book so much. Please read the series. Please come talk to me about this series. Robin Hobb has quickly cemented her way as one of my favorite writers of all time in just these few books that I've read from her. I love this series so much. It's so good. Everyone read the Farseer trilogy, please. I was really afraid that like the rest of the trilogy would fall flat for me because I loved book one so much and so many people didn't like book one. So I was really worried to read the rest of the trilogy, but book two, wow, just amazing. The next book that I read was The Bear and the Nightingale by Katherine Arden. I would say this is kind of hard to describe. It's very whimsical, very atmospheric, but this is an adult fantasy with Russian folklore elements, and it follows the main character Vasilisa, who grows up in kind of a small town and has always been a little bit different. This is really just so magical and whimsical. Like I said, it feels like you are getting told a fairy tale, and those vibes are what I really enjoyed about this. I would say that this really is the perfect winter read. I'm so glad that I read it during winter. I really enjoyed the reading experience and I'm really looking forward to reading the rest of the series. This is also great because I feel like so much adult fantasy is so long and dense, like Royal Assassin, which I just showed, but this is pretty short and it was relatively quick to get through. Next, I finished Assassin's Quest by Robin Hobb, which is the third and final book in her Farseer trilogy. This book is a chunker. Like, all of the Farseer books are chunkers, but this one is the longest. This one, how many pages was this one? This was 838 pages, which is so long. Probably the longest book I've read recently. One of the longest books I've probably read in the past year. But honestly, I got through this and the other one pretty quickly just because I was just in such a mood where I needed to keep reading. I was like, Robin Hobb, what are you doing? What are you doing to me? What's going to happen? I have some complicated feelings on this book. There were parts of this book that I absolutely loved and that made me so emotional, but I think I really wanted just a little bit more from it because I loved books 1 and 2 so much. And that isn't to say it needed necessarily more length, because this is, like I said, a chunker, but I don't know, I just wanted something more. And I think that especially comes into play with the ending, because I felt like the ending was a little bit rushed and some things kind of happened sort of conveniently and quickly, and I wanted more. I did really love the writing and a bunch of the characters, but yeah, I just wanted something else from it. I am really looking forward to reading Robin Hobb's other works, and I know there's a series or 2 or 3, I think it's 2 more series that follow some of the characters from this trilogy, so I am especially looking forward to reading those. I'm really interested to see where Robin Hobb is planning on taking these characters in the future. I think the next thing I'm going to be reading is a different series by her, the Ship of Magic series, so I won't be continuing with these characters right away, but I do definitely plan on doing that in the future. If you have read this, I would love to hear your thoughts on it, because I feel like when I see people talk about this series, I feel like I see people not really like book 1, then like book 2 more than book 1, and then like book 3 even more, and I feel like I had a very different experience reading the series than most people had. I absolutely adored book 1. A lot of people say it's slow. I liked that like slow build up and I found it really interesting. And then I absolutely adored book 2, and then book 3 just fell a little bit flat for me. Like I said, I still really enjoyed reading this. I'm glad I read it. I did not give it a bad rating, but I just wanted a bit more from it, and I'm really curious to see what other people's thoughts are on this book. The next thing I read was Who I Was With Her by Nida Tindall. This is a YA contemporary with a bi main character, and she's in the closet, and that is even further complicated when her secret girlfriend dies in a car crash. Almost nobody knows that they were dating, so she has to kind of deal with her grief and the reactions to things very much on her own, but she also interacts with her girlfriend's brother and one of her girlfriend's exes. This book is a lot about grief and self-acceptance and growth, and I really liked those themes. Like I said, this does deal a lot with grief, and there is a death from a car crash, so definitely trigger warnings for those things. And as always, I will be putting trigger warnings for all of the books that I mention down in the description below. This may not be a comprehensive list, it will just be the ones that I can find, so please don't treat the trigger warnings in the description as for sure all of the trigger warnings that exist in these books. Definitely, if trigger warnings are something you want to know going in, do your own research, but I will, as always, put trigger warnings in the description below. This is a beautiful book. It is also a deeply sad book, so I would definitely say, like, make sure you're in the right mood to read this, because it did make me incredibly sad at times when I was reading it. The next thing that I read was Nick and Charlie by Alice Oseman. This is a novella following the characters from Heartstopper, and I thought this was pretty cute, but it was very short. The words are pretty spaced out, and this was really quick to read, and I think I just wanted a little bit more substance from it, but I found it pretty cute. The next thing that I read was Graceling by Kristen Cashore, and I read this as part of a book club. My friend RC is running the Finish That Series book club, and he invited me and our other friend Izza to guest host with him for the entirety of the Graceling Realm series. So the Finish That Series book club is a book club that's dedicated to finishing out and reading different series. So the first one was the Graceling Realm series. I read this for the first time in probably 2015, and I don't think I really enjoyed it, and then I reread it last year in 2020 and loved it, and I was really happy to get to read it again because I really enjoyed it. This is a YA fantasy that takes place in a world where there are some people who are gracelings. They have different graces, which is a magic that's kind of an extreme skill at something. Since this is a reread and I did read it for a live show, I won't say too much more about it. Definitely check out the live show, especially if you've read this. We do get into some spoilers, but we start out with no spoilers, and I think we give a warning before we get into spoilers, so you can at least watch part of it if you haven't read the book. But just kind of a summary of my feelings were that I really enjoyed this. I really liked the prose. I love Kata as a main character, and I really like all of the themes that Kristen Cashore has put into the different books in this series, which I will talk about more when I talk about other books in this series as well. I will also link the live show in the description box below if you want to see some of my thoughts and RC and Izza's thoughts on this book. The next thing I read was Daughter of Smoke and Bone by Laini Taylor, which I have been meaning to read for years. I have owned this for quite a while. It's a pretty old series, I'd say. Honestly, I'm not sure exactly when this came out, but quite a while ago. I've had this on my TBR for ages. I just never picked it up, and honestly, I had kind of low expectations for this. I didn't think I would dislike it, but I thought that I would find it just okay, an enjoyable but not really special. But this really surprised me because I enjoyed this a lot more than I thought I was going to. I found it very engaging. I absolutely zoomed through it very quickly. It really hooked me. It really kept me engaged, and I was like, this is not what I expected at all. I also didn't realize that this was a YA modern urban fantasy. This takes place in modern day Prague. For some reason I thought this was a historical fantasy. I don't know why I thought that, but I did think that. And then all of a sudden they were talking about cell phones and texting, and I was like, what? there's texting in this? We're in modern times? Oh. I feel like everyone read this before I did, and I almost didn't pick this up. I almost decided to get rid of this, and I'm so glad I did read it because I really enjoyed my reading experience. It wasn't like a perfect book, but it was so entertaining and it really, really hooked me. The next thing I read was Punching the Air by Ibi Zoboi and Yusuf Salam. This is a YA contemporary in verse that follows a boy who is wrongfully incarcerated. I highly recommend the audiobook for this. That's how I read it, especially because it's written in verse. I tend to really enjoy some of the audiobooks I've read that are written in verse. The main character of this is a 16-year-old black boy named Amal who is sentenced to several years in prison after allegedly attacking a white boy. The main character Amal had a really strong voice, which I feel like I especially experienced because I listened to the audiobook, so that's another reason that I would recommend the audiobook for this. And I especially liked how he was an artist and a poet. I definitely recommend the book, especially, like I said, reading it via audio. I do think at some point I will try to reread it and read it physically just because I'm curious to see kind of the verse laid out on the page, but I really enjoyed the audiobook. The next thing that I read was Days of Blood and Starlight by Laini Taylor, the sequel to Daughter of Smoke and Bone. I absolutely zoomed through this book just like book one. I also liked this even more than book one. I really enjoyed this second book. I can't really say that much about this because it's a sequel, which is unfortunate because I want to talk about it because I really liked this book. I'm scared to see what's going to happen in book 3, which is part of the reason that I absolutely zoomed through books 1 and 2, and I have yet to finish book 3. I still haven't finished book 3. I'm scared. I don't know what Laini Taylor is going to do to these characters. I am frightened because it's the finale in a fantasy series. Who knows what's going to happen? Sad things happen in here, sad things happen in book 1. What's Laini Taylor going to do in book 3? I don't know. I'm scared. Like I said, I will put trigger warnings in the description box below, but I just want to mention, I won't say the trigger warnings for all of the books I talk about, but I did want to mention that there is a pretty heavy trigger warning in this book for an attempted sexual assault that happens on page. The next thing that I read was Dazzled by Ryan LaSala. I read this as an audiobook and I also read it as an arc on NetGalley. This is a YA contemporary M/M romance and I found it really, really fun. This is following the main character Rafi, who loves crafting cosplay. I honestly don't want to say that much more because I read the summary of the book before I read it, and something that gets mentioned in the summary doesn't happen until like 2/3, if not more, the way through the book. So the whole time in the book I was expecting something to happen and it kept not happening, and I was like, okay, but this thing is going to happen, and then it finally happened and I was like, we're pretty close to the end. So I would say don't really read that much about the book before you read it. I do definitely recommend the book, and one thing I really liked about it is that a lot of the book was kind of about Rafi's past relationship with his ex-boyfriend and kind of second chances and like if they have a second chance at things, and the book went between the present day and then a past timeline, so it kind of alternated chapters, and I really, really liked that. So you got to see how they got into a relationship in the first place as Rafi was navigating things in the present, and then kind of what happened in their relationship in the past. This had messy and flawed characters, second chances, cosplay, crafting, and competition, so if any of those things sound up your alley, definitely check this book out. The next thing was The Sprite and the Gardener, written by Joe Witt with illustrations by Rhea Abrego, and this is another arc that I read on NetGalley, and this was an adorable graphic novel. I highly, highly recommend this graphic novel. It's so cute. The art is so cute. I loved this so much. In this world, sprites used to take care of gardens, but then humans started kind of taking over gardens, and sprites didn't really need to do that anymore, and they've kind of fallen apart from the world and kind of live separately from humans, and so sprites taking care of gardens has kind of become a thing of the past. And then a sprite named Wisteria starts trying to explore the world, kind of find out about things and how things used to be. This was just so sweet and wholesome, and it was exactly what I needed when I read it, and it just made me so happy. I highly, highly recommend this graphic novel. The next thing I read was another graphic novel, and that was Victor LaValle's Destroyer. I really enjoyed this, but it's definitely a big contrast to The Sprite and the Gardener, which I also really enjoyed. That one was very wholesome. This was definitely more dark, but it was very enjoyable to read. I honestly had no idea what to expect for this. I read this for our C's Cardigan Comics book club, and that's pretty much the only reason I read it. I read it because it was a pick for his club. I was going to pick it up, and I decided not to really look at what it was about before I read it, and I am very, very glad that I did that, because after I finished the graphic novel, I went on Goodreads and I read the description summary on Goodreads, and it makes no sense. If you plan on reading this book, please do not read the summary or description before you read it. First off, it kind of spoils some things that happen in the graphic novel, pretty close to the end. Also, it says some things in the description that are just not accurate. I'm not sure how that description was written, but it literally says some things in the description that never happen in the graphic novel. They are not accurate to the plot at all. I'm not really sure why they're said in the description, so yeah, please don't read the description before you read this. I highly recommend just checking the book out. All I really knew going in was that this was a Black Frankenstein retelling, and honestly I think that's kind of all you need to know going in. This also has some horror elements, and I'm not really a horror person, so I wasn't really sure what to expect in terms of that, and I ended up really liking those elements and actually liking this graphic novel a lot more than I thought I was going to, because like I said, there were the horror elements to it. It was also interesting because in this world, Frankenstein creating his monster is actually a thing that happened in the past. It's not just a story, it's something that actually happened in history, and now some modern scientists are kind of toying with some technology and doing some things that are related to that. The next thing that I read was Our Dreams at Dusk, which is the first volume in a manga series, and I just want to mention that there are some pretty big trigger warnings for this, so definitely check those out in the description box below. This is the first time that I ever read a manga series. Right after finishing volume 1, I did pick up volumes 2 through 4, so I read all 4 volumes of this manga series this month, and I don't want to say too much more about it because I have a whole non-spoilery reading vlog for this series, which you can check out. I will link that in the description box below. So that video talks a lot more about my thoughts on the series, but I will say I really enjoyed it and I highly recommend it. If anyone has some manga recommendations for me, I want to read more manga, so definitely let me know. The main character of this is gay, and there are a lot of queer side characters, which I really liked, and this touches on some really important themes. Each volume also expanded on some side characters even more, which I really liked. And I'd say I liked volumes 1 through 3 about the same. I think of those 3, I'd say I liked volume 1 the best, but these 3 are about even, and then volume 4 I liked the most. If you want to hear more of my thoughts on these, you can check out my non-spoilery reading vlog. The next thing that I read was The Thingamajig by Catherine Doherty. Yes, this is a children's picture book. I read it on NetGalley. It was absolutely adorable, and this was illustrated by Christina Lynn. I just love the art style of this. I found it really fun. I recommend it. I've been reading some picture books recently because I have found them available on NetGalley, and they're just so entertaining. Sometimes you really just need a really short, wholesome children's book to read. I highly recommend doing that if you just need a short little pick-me-up, you need something with some cute art, some adorable little characters. It's just really fun. Next thing that I read was Fire by Kristen Cashore, which is the sequel to Graceling and was another read for the Finish That Series book club. I love this book even more than Graceling, especially the exploration of trauma in this book. It is so good. I love the character of Fire. I love the romance. This made me feel so many different emotions. I won't say much more because there is a live show with all of my thoughts on it, which I will link down below, but I really enjoyed this. As you can see, I really tabbed it up. I absolutely loved the experience of rereading this book and discussing it with my friends. Love this book. The next thing that I read was The Black Tides of Heaven by Neon Yang, which is a book that I read for the Bibliophiles book club that I'm a co-host of because this was our January pick. This is a novella that is the first in a series of adult fantasy novellas, and I am really looking forward to reading the books in the rest of the series. There are, I believe, 4 books in the series, and I'm really excited to see where else in this world the author is going to take the reader. I'm not going to say anything else about it because there is an entire live show dedicated to the bibliophiles talking about the book. We pretty much always start off non-spoilery and then warn when we get into spoilers, so if you want to see our thoughts, I will link the live show for this down below. But overall, I really enjoyed this, and I am looking forward to the rest of the series. The next thing that I read was The Camelot Betrayal by Kristen White, which is the sequel to The Guinevere Deception, which I read in, I think, early 2020, and I really enjoyed The Guinevere Deception. The series is a YA fantasy King Arthur retelling that follows the main character of Guinevere. I enjoyed book 1 a lot, and I enjoyed parts of this book, but unfortunately, I enjoyed it a lot less than book 1. A lot of this book felt like filler, and it didn't really further any of the overarching plot at all, and I also felt like a lot of things just happened kind of conveniently, and I didn't know why certain things were happening. I also expected some certain character or relationship developments that didn't happen that I am assuming will happen in the next book. I don't even know how many books are supposed to be in this series. Is it a trilogy? I'm not sure. I just didn't really find it super engaging. Like I said, there were some parts of it that I enjoyed, but overall I was a little bit let down because I really enjoyed book 1. But I do plan on probably continuing on in this series in the future. If you have read this, please let me know your thoughts because I'm interested to see if other people kind of also felt like this book was a little bit fillery. But like I said, I will probably pick up future books, so I probably won't be in a really big rush to read them. The next thing that I read was Girl Serpent Thorn by Melissa Brasherdoust, which is a YA sapphic Persian-inspired fantasy that follows the main character Soraya, who has been cursed with a poisonous touch. Soraya has been kept away from everyone for years because of her poisonous touch to protect everyone around her, and now her brother's wedding is approaching, and with that some kind of things are unfolding. Soraya's curse involves the blood of what is a sort of demon in their world in her veins, and when one of them is captured, Soraya wants to find out if they know anything about her curse so she can get it undone. I've had this on my TBR for a bit, but the only reason I picked it up in January is because RC was reading it and was completely absorbed by it. I think he read it in like 1 or 2 days, and he convinced me to pick it up, and then I read it in like 1 sitting. I just found this really gripping. I would say some plot elements are kind of convenient, and a couple times I found myself thinking that some things were a little bit convenient or cliche, but overall it was just really, really entertaining. And I think my reading experience being so entertaining and enjoyable made it so that aspects of the book that weren't as strong didn't really bother me. I just really enjoyed reading this. Also, as I mentioned, this was sapphic. This has a bi-main character. Really, really enjoyed it. And then the last book that I read was Early Departures by Justin Reynolds. This is a YA contemporary with some sci-fi elements that deals with grief, friendship, and second chances. I really don't want to say too much about it other than that because I didn't actually read the summary of this before reading the book. I think if I had read the summary before starting the book, I would have known some things that happened in the first few chapters that I was surprised about, and I think it is kind of good to go in not really knowing things so you can be surprised by these elements. I did listen to the audiobook of this, and I highly recommend the audiobook. Those are all 23 books that I read in the month of January. If you have read any of them, I would love to hear your thoughts on them. I would love to know what you read in the month of January. Please let me know if you are interested in any of these books now. I would love to hear about that. If you've made it this far in the video, let's say leave a fire emoji down below for fire, because that was one of my favorite reads of the month. If you enjoyed watching this, you can give it a like, and you could also subscribe to my channel. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you later. So it has some historical fiction. No, it didn't. What am I doing? I gotta say though, this cover's kind of ugly. A sapphic Persian-inspired which is a YA sapphic Persian-inspired YA fan. I said YA first. No. Being so enjoying. And I think my reading experience being so entertaining. I don't know.